Okay, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here at the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. My name is Andrew Tompkins, still. I am a researcher here, and the title of our panel tonight is Uncommon Experiences, Sharing Borders in Contemporary Europe. The idea behind the title, at least, was to kind of hint that there's perhaps something exceptional about the way that Europeans share borders, but also that perhaps those experiences are not the same for everyone, and that there is maybe a bit less that's shared than we might sometimes like to think. I have here with me three esteemed scholars from three very different disciplines to talk about different aspects of Europe's borders, both internal and external, and how they relate to questions of migration. We're going to try to think today about the present-day Schengen Zone and the European Union, also in relation to Europe's past and to possible futures. I'll proceed by introducing each panelist first and posing an initial set of questions to that person, and then we'll move on to the next panelist after that. Afterwards, I will pose a couple of questions.
Basically, it's like a job interview.
Exactly. I'll pose some questions to the entire panel and then open the floor to everyone to your questions, which is, of course, the most important part of what we're here for. So, to my immediate right is Jan Musekamp, who is a historian and the deputy director of the German Historical Institute here in Warsaw. He has a PhD and a habilitation from the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt an der Oder. And from 2018 to 2024, he was visiting assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Prior to that, he also taught at the Viadrina and was a visiting assistant professor at the University of Texas in Austin. As I understand, he also served for a time as a desk officer in the German Foreign Office, so maybe you'll want to bring that to the conversation, maybe not. In any case, his most recent publication, or his most recent monograph, is entitled Shifting Lines, Entangled Borderlands: Mobilities and Migration Along the Prussian Eastern Railroad. And it looks at the development of international networks, mobility, and migration. This builds partly on his previous monograph, which was about the city of Szczecin, formerly Stettin, which bears the title Zwischen Stettin und Szczecin, Metamorphosen einer Stadt von 1945 bis 2005, in English, Between German Stettin and Polish Szczecin, Metamorphoses of a City from 1945 to 2005. Most recently, he has also co-written with another of our colleagues here, Michael Zock, the article Mobility, Migration and Networks in Historiographical Research, How Sources Restore Agency to Ordinary People in the Journal of Modern European History. So I think, Jan, I'd like to open by asking you, since your most recent research has looked a lot at the 19th century and at border crossing experiences of people at that time, we tend to think of probably the First World War and as the moment when passports were introduced and when border controls perhaps became more serious than they were before, I'm not sure. But I wonder if you could describe for us what mobility and border control looked like for different kinds of people prior to the First World War.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. All the information was correct. What I can say about pre-First World War I mobility, so you already stressed different groups of people. So it really depends on who we look at and also the time period. Yeah, it's a difference 1910, 1860, or let's say 1880, 1890. Yeah. So let me just give some examples. And we are speaking of Europe, of course, if I got you right. So, and in my book, I was looking at East Central Europe. So that's mostly what is today Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine. At the time, it was, of course, the German Empire and the Russian Empire. So those are the two I'm looking at. So let's look at early tourists. Yeah. So someone who had the money to travel, someone who also had the connections, let's say, to get a passport and a visa. In the 1860s, most visa and passport requirements were abolished over Europe, yeah? But there were some exceptions, and that is the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So prior to 1860, basically all of Europe was a passport travel zone or visa zone, yeah? Even if those passports didn't look like they look today, but you still needed to go to local administration or police to acquire to legalize your stay, yeah? Just as you have to do it still today in Belarus or in the Russian Federation. In the 1860s, they abolished it because something important occurred. The railroad crossed borders. Many more people were traveling, and it was simply impossible to control these movements. And so what we see is travel for those tourists traveling between Eastern and Western Europe. I mean, the only obstacle was basically a border control at the Prussian eastern border, or in the other direction when Russians were traveling, or citizens of the Russian Empire, let's put it this way, were traveling to the German Empire. That was the only obstacle. Another group that I look at in that book is migrants, and here, of course, the situation is quite different. There is a space of opportunities, of course, with the railroad and with the steamship. So you can reach the ports if you want to migrate, let's say, to the United States. You can reach the ports more easily and less expensive than even like 20 years prior. But you need also to cross the borders. And to leave the Russian Empire, the legal way is to get a passport. And you only get a passport as a male if you have served, if you have done your military service. And most of those who left were actually not in that group. So they had to leave clandestinely. Yeah, and that is important to know about the massive migration from the Russian Empire to the United States. A lot of them Jewish, but also Polish and Lithuanian. 90% of them were crossing the border, like the green border. So they did not go through the official crossings, the checkpoints. Yeah. Another group would be early frequent travelers. Yeah, people who are on their way in business. Yeah, so I've looked at memoirs and descriptions of people who were, for example, traveling from the Russian Empire to the world exhibitions. Yeah, and these people were crisscrossing the European continent just like business travelers are doing it today. And yeah, so for these people, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, and they would also travel first class. They would travel. They would stay in palace hotels or Hôtel d'Angleterre, as they were often called. They would take luxury trains, while those people who were traveling as migrants, they were on the same tracks, traveling by railroad, but they would take fourth class or third class trains. So maybe just for a start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like we've always had business class in some form or another. I'd like to go back to a small point that you made a moment ago. You said that people needed to be effectively, I think, legalized when they arrived somewhere. So this sounds like maybe we're seeing a shift in terms of where control takes place. It's that the border itself becomes something much more tangible, much more of an actual obstacle than it had previously been, until, of course, then visa requirements are removed. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, so if you look at travel guidebooks from the 1850s, 1860s, there, for example, a travel guidebook for French travelers to what they call Germany. Yeah, but there's a rubric for every German state mentioning how much is the visa. Yeah, so travelers from France who would cross Germany, they would have to acquire the official document in each of the tiny little German states. Yeah, and that could also be expensive, of course. Yeah, so that is the other point. Yeah, if you need a passport in the Russian Empire, you need also to have the money to get one. Yeah, which is expensive, even if you have done the military service or if you're female. Yeah, there's multiple obstacles. So as you said, the business class for them it's not a problem, and it's pretty much comparable to what we see today.
Thank you very much. I know that some of your current research is about emigration of Ukrainian Germans from Europe to sometimes other parts of the world. And I wonder if you could just say something about what was pushing people to emigrate at that point in time. What was the driver of emigration in the time period that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I'm looking at those German speakers and I'm still struggling how to call them because honestly that adjective German did not play, I mean, maybe a very small role in their decisions to migrate. Yeah, they were speaking German dialects and they were emigrating because of opportunities, but also of pressure put on them by the Russian Empire. So the crucial point was that the Russian Empire feared kind of a geostrategic threat by German speakers, that they would pose a geostrategic threat. And so they hindered them from buying more land, they hindered them from inheriting the land, and that caused the stress that many decided to emigrate. But as I said, it's not about being German. I mean, they are made Germans by the Russian Empire. They were not feeling this way. And why? I mean, the evidence is many of them will go to Siberia. I mean, that is kind of, why would they go to Siberia if it's still the Russian Empire? But the Russian Empire feared them as a threat in the West, close to the German border, but they cherished them as a civilizational force in Siberia against the so-called Yellow Peril, against immigration from the Chinese Empire. And they did not go, interestingly, I mean, some of them went, but they did not go to what was then the Poznan province, where the German government was actually trying to Germanize the territory. And the German government was looking for German speakers, also from Volhynia, from Ukraine, to settle these territories. But the better offer for them was in Siberia, or in Canada, or in Brazil. And I would say they are, it's difficult to speak of Germans. You cannot speak of Germans, of course, and German speakers is partly correct. So it's difficult to how to call them.
Thank you very much. I have maybe one last question. It sounds like that states at this point in time, including the Russian Empire, were looking at people through a kind of racial grill or a racialized understanding of how they might be useful or how they might not be useful. This is, would you say that that is correct?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, in traditional historiography, often people or historians have spoken of open door policy, right? For example, the United States, that Europeans can immigrate, but that is one part of the story, right? On the other hand, 1882 sees the Chinese Exclusion Act, and so here's clearly the racial bias. So who do we want? Who do we consider to be valuable as settlers? And I've looked more at the Canadian case, where it was pretty similar. Just a couple years later was something like the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then there was, of course, a discussion who to invite. And the Canadian government did not want, for example, Catholic Italians to come. They did not like Jewish people to come, but they were sending their agents, for example, to the Russian Empire. And they were looking for German speakers who were seen as good farmers. Of course, white. They did not say that, but reality is that's why they came to Canada. And we see that in the Russian Empire as well. There's no Chinese exclusion here, as it is called, but there's a perceived danger of Asian immigration at the same time to the Russian Empire, which there is Asian immigration, of course, from the Chinese Empire, but it is a very tiny percentage, of course. So of course it's no danger, but still it's perceived as a danger, and that's important. And that is something that's global. I mean, this is happening at the same time in the 1880s, all over the British Empire, but also in the Russian Empire. And in Germany, I mean, there's also this talk about the Asiatic hordes that are entering the German realm.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move to our next panelist, who is also an expert in migration and human mobility, but in a much more contemporary context, namely now. Professor Ettore Recchi is professor of sociology at Sciences Po in Paris, as well as part-time professor at the Migration Policy Center of the EUI, the European University Institute in Florence. He has more than 200 journal articles, book chapters, working papers, edited volumes, and monographs to his name. So I'm very, very impressed
the monographs
by that.
at 3 or 4, and don't exaggerate.
But as I said, his core research revolves around human mobility and migration. And he's been involved in a number of larger projects, including, if I understand correctly, one that's ongoing with the Global Mobilities Project, based at the Migration Policy Center of the EUI. And in the past, a project entitled The Europeanization of Everyday Life, Cross-Border Practices and Transnational Identities Among EU and Third Country Citizens. This was one of the things that drew me to your research, as I'm also very interested in questions of transnationalism, everyday life in different periods of European history. One of the large outcomes of that last project, if I understand correctly, was the volume Everyday Europe, Social Transnationalism in an Unsettled Continent. And prior to that, you had also written a monograph entitled Mobile Europe, The Theory and Practice of Free Movement in the EU. I guess to start the discussion with you, we could probably pick up where we were a moment ago with migration. And I'd like to ask you, who is it that migrates within Europe nowadays and why? And if you want, you can go ahead and just pick up the other microphone there.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for the introduction. I would answer this question by reflecting upon the concept of migration altogether. Because when you ask me who is migrating now in Europe, I have a hard time disentangling who is migrating according to the conventional definition of migration. You know that I'm a quantitative scholar, basically, so you may leave the room now. And we quantitative scholars of migration follow very adamantly the definition of migration of the United Nations, which was released in the 1960s. So a migrant is somebody who moves from country A to country B and stays in country B for more than 12 months. So if we stick to this definition, a lot of the people who migrate within Europe don't correspond, don't stick to this definition. They move for shorter periods of time. That's one of the reasons why I think the definition, which is respected by demographers, sociologists, political scientists, economists working in migration studies, is really misleading because it hides, particularly in Europe, what somebody called middling migration. That is migration which is not tourism, it has some lifelong purpose, so it's not ephemeral, but it doesn't last as long as 13 months. And European Union, the free movement regime, has particularly boosted this type of short-term migration. And actually, the rationale of the free movement regime is to make Europeans move, but possibly move and not stay, but rather come back or move forward to another step of a journey, which we may interpret in a variety of ways. I mean, if you take a critical Marxist angle and say, oh, this is a way of flexibilizing the labor force and have a lot of disposable workers that you can hire and then fire easily and they go back to their country and there are no fuss. Okay, but you can also see it from a different perspective, from a perspective of agency. This is a strong way of empowering people to set up and organize their life and open up new perspectives to their life projects. I'm not sure I answered your question, because you were asking me a quantitative question and I didn't answer as a quantitative sociologist, so I'm turning you down.
That's okay, I'm better with qualitative answers anyway. I wonder though, if I could pick up on what you were just saying, is there a sense in which people move without actually moving, where they sort of go to a different place and they maintain their principal ties to the place they came from, and so the character of their very being in this other location is fundamentally different?
Now I give you numbers. So there is a constant in intra-EU migration. The flows, the volume of European citizens moving from one member state to another member state is practically constant over the last 10 years. It's 1.5 million, 1.5 million people moving within the EU. But it's also constant the amount, the proportion of these people who goes back to the country of origin, which is about a half. So, and these really substantiate this claim that people move but don't move. They return a lot. And we have also statistics showing that the average duration of stay of inter-European migrants has been diminishing over the last 20 years, particularly after the EU enlargement. So this speaks about transnationalism. This speaks about the fact that you keep one foot in one country and the other foot in a different country, and it's all about the balancing act of living across borders, right? And this makes Europe really exceptional. Although the free movement regime of European Union is not the only free movement regime in the world, there is a recent project which is directed by a lawyer, actually, Diego Acosta, who was at the University of Bristol. Now he has also a position in Spain. And the project is called Free Move, which I think this is something that may resonate with the public of historians. He has been classifying and recording all free movement regimes in the world, or bilateral free movement agreements between countries from, I think, the 1960s. And if I remember well, there are about 55 or 58 free movement regimes worldwide. The European Union is the most famous, is a little bit of a poster child of free movement for a number of reasons that we can discuss, but still you have also very obscure free movement regime. I never knew before browsing the list that there was a free movement regime between San Marino and France. In 1953, I think, San Marino and France signed a bilateral agreement by which residents of San Marino, which is basically the population of this room, can go to France and settle in France without needing an authorization. So they can cross the borders of Italy, Switzerland, no, maybe not, they go directly to France, and go to France without needing any visa or and enjoying all the benefits of free movement. I think it was made for the French to go to San Marino, possibly not for the San Marinesi.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, free movement is sort of part of the brand, if you will, of the European Union, which can be, of course, deeply problematic in a lot of ways. But I wonder, would you say that sort of the European Union, or at least life within the Schengen Zone, makes possible a fundamentally different form of kind of what you've described as everyday transnationalism or social transnationalism? Would you like to perhaps give us a definition of how you would like to see, how you'd like us to think about transnationalism in this sense?
Well, for me, transnationalism is the set of human practices that involve border crossing, which can be physical or virtual. So when you watch the media in another country, that's a form of transnationalism. It's a virtual transnationalism. If you follow an Instagram person or an influencer from another country, that's social transnationalism. But then there is the physical transnationalism, which hinges around mobility and travel. And yeah, so in this particular project, Everyday Europe is the book, we try and track both virtual and physical forms of transnationalism, but with the other project, the Global Mobilities Project, I didn't change my mind, but I thought that eventually what's really the cornerstone of transnationalism is physical mobility, is travel. So the project is really about all sorts of, all forms of travel of people around the world.
It seems that thinking about transnationalism, maybe the question is less sort of what is it, but what kinds of different qualities does it have under different circumstances? It seems that, you know, being transnational and living in a border zone could be very, very different from being transnational in the sense of jetting home every weekend for someone in business class again, or even different from someone taking a more infrequent journeys. Is there anything you'd like to say about this sort of variety of qualities of transnationalism?
At some point, I was intrigued by the idea what transnationalism could bring to European legitimacy or to the support for the European Union. And I've been researching the connections between transnationalism and feelings of sympathy and support and identification with the European Union. I must say that the results of all these mostly statistical analysis of surveys are mixed. And eventually, transnationalism, my conclusion from about a decade of time spent on this issue is transnationalism alone cannot promote a new collective identity. It's a necessary ingredient, but it's not sufficient. So Erasmus is a good thing from a standpoint of European Union, but you cannot think that Erasmus can be the the magic recipe to turn all Europeans into proud Europeans.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to our last panelist, Julia Buyskykh, who is an anthropologist and a co-founder of the NGO, the Center for Applied Anthropology in Kyiv. And as an anthropologist, your work differs substantially from that of a historian or a sociologist in that you engage in participant observation, embodied knowledge. You yourself are often part of what it is that you are working on. I should probably say before that you have you did a PhD in history and ethnology, so you do also understand quite a bit about history, from Taras Shevchenko Kyiv National University, and that you're currently working on a second PhD nearing completion at the University College Cork in Ireland, and this one is in anthropology and the study of religions. Some of your recent publications include a large monograph, West of the Bug, Diaries from the Borderlands, published in 2024 under a Ukrainian title that I sadly will not attempt to...
It is translated in Polish, will be published this year, so...
Great, thank you very much. And you've also published recently Pilgrimages to the Sylvan Church, Ukrainian Greek Catholics in Poland Searching for Home in the journal Religion in 2025. As well as an article entitled Old New Colonial Tendencies in Social Anthropology, Empathy in Wartime in Ethnologia Polona in 2023. So a lot of your work involves looking at cross-border religious communities, Ukrainian Greek Catholics, along the Ukrainian-Polish border. Could you describe for Ukrainian Greek Catholic pilgrims, for example, what the process of crossing the border looks like, or to the extent that you'd like to talk about it, what this experience has been for you as you accompanied them in doing so?
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this introduction and for your question. Indeed, my work differs from my colleagues' work, definitely not quantitative methodology at all, only qualitative methodology. So I crossed Polish-Ukrainian border many times on different occasions, making myself, as we say in anthropology, an instrument of knowing. So I did research on borders in 2015-2018. Then there was a gap for COVID years and beginning of the full-scale invasion. And then I renewed my research on borders starting from 2023. So I have a perspective of different years, because in 2015, 2016, it was still visa regime. So if you need to go for pilgrimage, let's say to Polish shrine, you had to obtain visa for 3 days. And for 3 days, you had to go to the Polish consulate to apply for visa, be it Schengen or short-term visa, and to go through the whole procedure. You know, starting from 2017, there was a visa liberation regime when citizens of Ukraine could go to European Union for 90 days within 180 days. And then this whole exodus enforced by war, refugee exodus. So, of course, during the visa period, 2015, 2016, those pilgrims who were coming from Lviv, from Ternopil, from other cities in historical Austro-Hungary and Galicia, they still had to obtain visa. And it was a subject of conversations, a little bit of resentments, because many people were descendants of those Greek Catholics and Orthodox who were historically resettled from Subcarpathia, from Poland, in 1944, 1946, to the Soviet Ukraine. And they were sort of coming to the ancestral land. And the very idea that you have to obtain visa to cross the border, to go to the ancestral land, to see the villages, the cemeteries where the ancestors are buried, that caused a lot of tension. And some, again, in conversations with me, were recalling the period before Poland entered Schengen Zone, when they could cross the border without visa. So all these stories when going into pilgrimage to this shrine, which again was ancestral, to see the cemeteries, to see the villages, even some rural households that are still preserved, they all connected with this, should I apply visa to go to the ancestral land, to homeland? Should I not try? There was the time when my father would just cross the border and Polish border guards would just let him in before European Union came. You know, all this on. With visa liberation regime, it became different. No visa for pilgrimage, you know, and this whole pilgrimage crossing the border became a little bit lighter, a little bit easier, a little bit more fun. More people started to engage into the pilgrimage, you know, up to 500, 600 people crossing the border on the pilgrimage. And still it was a long queue, and Shechyni-Medyka border, cross-border point. It's a border crossing where you can go on foot. And still pilgrims need to obtain invitations from the monastery or from the church that their aim to enter European Union is a pilgrimage. It sounds a little bit awkward, but this is the reality from the ground, from the grassroots perspective, as you asked me. And then the war came to Ukraine, and there was an influx of war migrants before the full-scale invasion. Ukrainian sociologist Victoria Sereda calls them invisible refugees in 2014, 2016 from Crimea and Donbas area. But they were not so massive as the exodus of 2022, 2023 and ongoing. And I remember crossing borders in 2022, and there was really the influx of people and border guards who were not really looking at the documents or the amount of days you spent in European Union. But it all came back in 2023. And last year, the new system was introduced on the borders when your fingerprints are scanned and you're photographed, and it's on and on. And you know, even the question, what is your aim in entering European Union, for many people sounds a little bit out of place, because people are still going to seek safety, you know. And for many, Poland is a huge transit zone, because they go somewhere else, you know. So all these realities, they are micro realities, and yet they influence the big politics. So I always argued that border is not a periphery, it is a center. Because the knowledge produced at the border, the hierarchies that we see at the border, they all influence center, they're all there.
Could you say something about differentiating between different, I guess, positions in those hierarchies? What are the kind of factors or intersections or aspects of a person that might affect how they experience the process of crossing the border at those checkpoints? which will obviously vary according to different times and circumstances and that sort of thing. But
it's a big question. Thank you. I'm thinking, about the diverse groups of those people who cross the border in both sides. Once I was stuck at the border and actually observing the so-called roots pilgrimage in both sides. So Ukrainians from Ukraine were coming to Poland to their ancestral sites. Those descendants of post-war resettlements, and Polish from Poland were coming to their kind of roots pilgrimage to places in Galicia which were meaningful to their ancestors. Those who lived, let's say, in Lviv and surrounding areas. And there were like two pilgrimages at the border, two touristic buses filled with people who have roots in those borderland areas, in the borderland that was artificially cut by the Polish-Soviet border, And I was stuck there between them, two queues in different sites, and thinking how artificial this border was, how senseless were these post-Second World War conferences where leaders were cutting the European map on borders, and about the legacies of that past that we still feel. And the ordinary people, these lay people crossing the border, they're still stuck in these legacies of post-Second World War cutting maps. So what they were discussing, they were having a lot of resentments that they are having ancestral land there or there on the other parts of the border, and they have to cross the border in order to re-engage with this, to see something that they knew only from family stories. And to pray on the ancestral sites. Religion is very meaningful there as well as means to reconnect with some big family story. So that was one thing. The other big thing was the arrogance of Polish border guards. Karolina Forest described it beautifully in Building Fortress Europe in her monograph. How European Union is becoming the fortress. Yes, you're right, inside it's a free zone, maybe very unique, but outside it's a fortress. It's a fortress for migrants who are coming to Lampedusa Island, for example, and drowning there. It's a fortress for many people who cross the external European Union border. We know it from Polish-Belarusian border very well as well. And that was the same on Polish-Ukrainian border. When, I described it in the article, my own experience when I was asked whether I intend to do prostitution in Poland. And when I was showing my invitations from the University of Warsaw in Polish language, saying that I am a visiting scholar and I'm doing research, and the border guard was, yeah, we know how to fake all these invitations, just we know really what women from the East are doing in our country. And after that incident, I was told that I probably should have asked, the number of his chef, or to do some, to do a claim, that I was offended at the border in that way, having actually official invitations from Polish educational institution. But that was the case, That's why I'm using my own experience, as an instrument for my research. Mm-hmm. That's it. Even now, crossing the border back and forth between Kyiv and Warsaw, I often face this arrogance, when Polish border guards are reproducing the narratives in right-wing media, like, oh, we're so tired of Ukrainian presence here. We need Poland for Polish, for example. That's the phrase that I heard as well at the
From border guards?
Yes. We need Poland for Polish. So that was it.
Okay.
And you're not from Afghanistan or Pakistan. Imagine if you were an Afghani or a Pakistani. Yeah.
And didn't speak Polish because I speak Polish to them,
Before I move on, I'd like to say I am very sorry that you experienced those things. And I think it is shameful that the burden should be placed on you to take down somebody's number and report it and that sort of thing. I don't think that this is how this should operate, but it is very unfortunate that this is a very common situation. But thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's important for everyone to hear it as well. I'd like to pick up on something you said to pose a question to everyone on the panel, since you spoke of Fortress Europe. And we are, of course, living at a moment in the history of the Schengen Zone and the history of the European Union, in the history of Europe, probably full stop, where there has been, at least with Schengen, there's always been the right for states to declare a temporary suspension of the general rule that is supposed to be no border controls. But this has been temporarily suspended almost constantly along numerous borders within Europe for years on end now. And at the same time, of course, the external borders of Schengen are in many respects closed. Open and closed are very difficult terms to use in this sense, because borders are always open to some people and closed to others. It's a kind of modulation of to whom and to how many people and to what particular qualities and persons that openness is applied in that closure. But I'm going to ask this question in a very naive sense, and I'd invite any, you can respond in whatever order you like to do. But we kind of treat the European Union as if this regime of internal open borders is something special, unique, and there seems to be this idea that we're going back to a situation of closed borders. And I'm wondering, are closed borders even normal? I mean, is this how we should define a norm of what borders are?
Can I say something? Now, first of all, I want to share a story as well, just to tell you I'm not just a quantitative sociologist. Something very odd happened to me immediately after Brexit. I was going to the UK, and I showed up at the British border with an Italian identity card. And at the time, it was still possible technically to cross the border because the Brexit had not been implemented as yet. So the border guard very arrogantly took the identity card. It was a paper identity card. What's this? I don't do anything with this. Give me a passport. I said, no, I'm entitled. No, I won't let you in. This is too, you see, it's old, it's paper. And he threw it out with contempt. And I kind of provoked that. I must confess that I wanted to see what happened. But also I didn't have a passport with me at home because it's a complicated story. But I had an old passport. And I brought the old passport knowing that by law, in Schengen, you can cross the border by proving your identity, and also an expired document can serve to prove your identity. I said, okay, I have an expired passport. Either you let me in with my expired passport, or I will report these to authorities. And he let me go through with expired passport. But again, border guards are strange animals everywhere. It's not only the Polish ones. Now coming to your question, I had a project as part of my Global Mobilities project a couple of years ago with some colleagues, not alone, and I want to mention the most important collaborator I've been having for these years, a sociologist at the University of Flensburg, Emanuel Deutschmann. And Emanuel and I did a sub-project on the permeability of land borders worldwide. So we looked at all the maps of the land borders on this planet, and we recorded all the border crossing infrastructures, that is roads, railways, and checkpoints. And so we created a data set with these, and we created an index, a border permeability index. And long story short, yes, the European Union is the area in the world with the most permeable borders. But we also found out that second to the US, it's also the area with the densest network of checkpoints, which means that just in case, European Union can quite quickly turn into an internal fortress as well, not only an external fortress.
Thank you. Jan, did you want to?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I realized I didn't answer your question about the First World War, what it changed. And I would say this connects very well to what we are just discussing. I think the tendency before the First World War was, even if we take out racist aspects in the United States, but if you look at Europe, it was more, the tendency was of more open and more permeable borders. I wouldn't go that far as to say it's an early Schengen, but in fact it was pretty similar. Yeah, if you could travel from most Western European countries to Prussia, and so basically visa-free. You could not stay, of course, and work. That was not that easy. Yeah. And arrogance of the border guards. I mean, that happened also at that time. Yeah, and we even find it in the travel guidebooks, Buyskykh of the 1880s, where they are warning about the Russian border guards. They will treat you like like animals. Yeah, I mean, and your point about transnationalism and if we become good Europeans when we travel, and I mean, the 19th century with these open borders, some people thought, yeah, there will be a cosmopolitan class, international class, they will not care about nationalities, languages, and so on. If you look at the guidebooks, travel guidebooks, Buyskykh to Russia, for example, you will see all the stereotypes that we have today about Eastern Europe in the West already in the 19th century in those travel guidebooks. When it comes to visiting a city like Moscow or St. Petersburg, Kiev or Warsaw, what they depict is museums with Western art. Yeah, so these travel guidebooks create a space, a Western space in the Russian Empire, in Poland or whatever, and this is kind of confirming the identity of those who are coming, let's say, from Germany. Yeah, confirming their identity, their national identity as Germans. And it's not opening up, like creating a transnational European identity. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I would, for myself, I would say Erasmus has really shaped me, and also 21 years living in Frankfurt Oder and Słubice on the Polish-German border has shaped me. For me, it's difficult to say I'm not a European. Yeah. Constant exchange, and I mean, we were dancing twice on the bridge. We were dancing when Poland became a member of the European Union, which was a little weird experience because the border was still there. Yeah, but then the bigger party was, of course, with Schengen accession. Yeah, and so I really feel very bad about what's going on with Schengen. I mean, the prelude is, of course, COVID-19, where they tested this. They tested how easy it is to close the borders again, and they disrupted basically everything that was growing since Schengen, accession of Poland to Schengen in the borderlands. Yeah, the people who are crossing, the people who start feeling like borderlanders, yeah, like a different kind of people, and now it's disrupted again. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the presentations we had today, right, about cutting the existing connections, yeah, and that is what happened with the reintroduction of the border controls at the Polish-German border.
I'd just like to add a very small comment that COVID, of course, represented a kind of Zuspitzung, the apex of this level of control. But the temporary suspensions of the Schengen regime that have been near constant have been that way since 2015, which, you know, in this period that was misleadingly and horribly called the migrant crisis.
Can I add just a number? From 2000, if you can download from the European Commission website the suspensions, and the number of suspensions from 2006 till today fills up 44 pages. It's and has been exploded after COVID.
Okay, a little bit about human experience. Following up your comment, Jan, I remember myself on that bridge. And it was my first experience of border without border, actually, between Germany and Poland. And I was going back and forth through the bridge, observing people and thinking that I want this type of border between Poland and Ukraine, really. And I don't know, maybe there will be time like that, but not today. But that was a magnificent experience. And the other border that I saw between Portugal and Spain, just a river, No border checkpoints, nothing, just a river. Just pilgrims going to Camino Santiago de Compostela through the bridge, through the river. And I don't know whether people who live constantly near these borders without borders actually have a sense of border or not. You know, Germans from Frankfurt na Oder go into Subice to buy something to eat there. Polish from Subice go to and study in Frankfurt na Oder, all of that. Just no sense of hard physical border. Whereas on the external borders of European Union, there is this sense. And my respondents in Polish Subcarpathia, they would turn my attention on the villages that were cut by the Polish-Soviet border. So on the Polish side, there is a village Dziewięcierz, Devyatyr on the Ukrainian side. And this is the real human experience of living in when the village was cut and the relatives became Soviet citizens and the other part of family, Polish citizens, communist Poland. And the whole family life was abruptly changed, cut, all of that. So I just think when we are thinking about the borders, the main thing is human experience and the life of every human being in these borders. The same, the whole Iron Curtain, symbolical Iron Curtain, but yet very hard and physical at the Eastern Bloc borders, Bulgarian-Turkish border, when many Eastern Germans wanted to cross the border through the forest and to get to the free world in Greece and in Turkey, and they were stuck in this forest on Bulgarian side, for example, and we don't know much about their lives. One of the cases, the same with Polish-Ukrainian border, I recount stories from my respondents who were talking about Ukrainians from Soviet Ukraine who wanted to come to Poland and they were stuck in forests along the border and they just couldn't go further, for example. And I think that the problems that we have now, personally, it's all the legacies of that time. We're still going through Cold War era, but in different dimension. And micro scale that I see on the border, really.
I'm very grateful to all the panelists for answering my questions. But now I'd like to open up the discussion to the audience. And I think that you can also, there are certainly people in this room who can bring experiences from beyond Europe to the discussion to help us think about this. So would anyone like to ask the very first question? The most difficult one to ask, but...
Thank you so much. That was enlightening. I wanted to ask you whether you think that the borders in contemporary Europe are by nature in some way different from, say, former colonial borders or borders in Southeast Asia or borders in Latin America in regard to the amount of violence that happens at borders. And we didn't really focus much on that, but I wonder whether that is a question in research and or whether it's an assumption that underpins some of our conceptions of European borders.
I think there was a question right next to you as well, so maybe we'll collect 2 or 3 questions and then let the panel respond.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, that was very, very interesting. I just would like to perhaps question one implicit assumption on the panel, and that is that people in the majority take borders for granted. And that may be the case for some kind of borders. But I have grown up in the northern German city of Braunschweig, which used to be part of what is called the Zonenrandgebiet. And that was an area, even if the border was a few 10 kilometers away, that was dominated by a border that was not accepted by most of the people living there. And I have the feeling that something quite similar applies to other borders as well, even in Europe, and of course also with regard to borders at the outer borders of Europe. Not all of them are taken for granted as much as one may assume, and there are reactions to them. And so I would ask whether the question of consciousness of border is something that has perhaps changed or reconstituted in the last 100 50 years or 100, 200 years nearly, covered by Jan Musekamp. Yeah, that would be interesting.
I think I saw an additional question from Michael Frankel, and then we'll go ahead and let the panel respond.
Thank you. That's a wonderful discussion. And listening to all the thoughts about closed external borders and Europe as frontier, I thought I'd test a concept on you. That's not a new concept, but it wasn't mentioned, and it's exception. So the question is whether to substantiate the closed borders, we need some kind of exceptions. And how that works together. So for instance, in the refugee crisis at the end of the 1930s, perhaps the best comparable example to what we see today, there would be exceptions for children, mostly Jewish children, and some other cases. And this quite symbiotically helps to sustain the really closed border for most of the others. In studies about the humanitarianism, there's discussion about health or the suffering body as something that substantiates an exception. So I would just love to have your thoughts on exception.
The first question, I think I'd like to reflect on your question that you posted. The other borders, the first border that comes to my mind is the border between Mexico and the US, the border of violence, and even Guantanamo, it's the border in itself as well, this prison. I obviously didn't do research there, but I read a lot of anthropological literature on crossing the border, again on religious pilgrimages around the border in Mexico, and the way how people are treated at this border horribly, and the way how it's becoming the other wall in the world between different worlds and that. So again, for me, this border is about human experience, the way how I see borders at all as anthropologist. And I always ask myself, how can we help, practically as scholars with these hardships on the borders? The borders everywhere in Pakistan and India, the conflicts there, and the minefield that the war can be there as well. Thailand, Pakistan, India, there as well. And what to do with people. We're now facing the huge, I'm not talking about my country now, I'm talking about the whole world, the refugee camps, these women and children everywhere. And sometimes I feel that academia is helpless, to be honest. I do a little bit of practical, engaged anthropological research through my NGO, and I swear to God, I am helpless with this because I don't know how all our knowledge, education, and toolkit can help actually people. Sometimes it feels like utopia to me. But being at the borders, I was at the refugee camp actually in Greece with my colleagues, and I couldn't help myself. I was just crying there because even if we as anthropologists give some solutions to those who stay higher, they don't listen to anthropologists. So I don't have any good answer on that question, maybe. Okay.
I want to say something about that question as well, and speaking particularly thinking of a liquid border, the Mediterranean Sea. That's where the project, the missing migrants, and about the people who lost their lives trying to cross the sea, that border. Now, thinking of what we can do for that, I'm thinking particularly of research done by some colleagues of mine, and particularly the number one author of this paper is a statistician and demographer at the University of Potsdam, Alejandra Rodriguez Sanchez. Her origin is, she's Colombian of origin, but she worked at the University of Potsdam. Now, she did an incredible study, incredibly complex statistically, testing whether search and rescue operations in fact increase the crossing of the Mediterranean of potential migrants, and eventually also the death indirectly. Because there was a paper by some econometricians that demonstrated that. And I read that paper 3 times, and I found it very flawed, and I wrote a blog demolishing that paper, but that was not enough. And this lady, this scholar, Alejandra, I want to repeat her name, Alejandra Rodriguez Sanchez, she published an article in Scientific Reports, which is a generalist nature journal, showing with fantastic statistical technique that in fact, no, having search and rescue operations didn't increase the crossing of the Mediterranean, and didn't have any impact, didn't increase the number of deaths, quite the contrary. So I think this is a valuable contribution that we can give to policy as social researchers.
Yeah, I think what we can do, I feel like historians, I mean, nobody listens to historians. And I mean, yeah, you listen, thank you.
Other historians. Politicians like historians.
My impression is, when it comes to migration history, I mean, we've seen it all before, right? We've seen most of it before. We've seen since forever, right? And yeah, since ancient history, history is the history of migration, and basically it's always the othering that is taking shape, and yeah, nobody's really interested in that research. That's my impression, but I don't want to be too pessimistic here. I wanted to get to the question if people take borders for granted, and to give some historical examples that, of course, people do not necessarily take it for granted. I just recently read an interesting book on Polish interwar history, looking at the Polish-German borderlands. And here we can see that, yeah, people would not accept it, and so they would have to cross at the border checkpoints, but they wouldn't do it. They would simply go on the way they did. Yeah, as long as border guards would let them. And I think that is something that is often overlooked. Until, let's say, after the First World War, it was very difficult to guard those borders, because the states were not willing to invest the money, and also they didn't have the same measures as they have today, right? And so crossing the green border was normal, I would say, right long into the interwar period. Yeah. So I think that has been a normalcy. Yeah, the border, as we know it today, like the hardened border, the securitized border, is something that's fairly new, I would say. Yeah, and that makes it, I mean, as for me as a historian, also so frustrating. I also wanted to briefly answer Michal's remark on if we need an exception to make a border work, right? Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned Tobias Brinkmann's work today. I've also looked at how the Jewish refugees from the Russian Empire in the late 19th and early 20th century entered Germany as transmigrants, moving on to the United States. So technically, they did not have the documents to cross. First, they didn't have the documents to leave Russia, yeah, because they didn't have a passport. Second, they had no documents to enter Germany. Yeah. The reason why Germany made an exception for hundreds of thousands of people, we have to say, is money. Yeah, because they would buy railroad tickets, they would buy steamship tickets from German companies, and the only thing Germany had to make sure of, because they did not want Jewish people to settle in Germany, was to make sure that they would be transported quickly to the ports, right? So that is the kind of exception that re-emerged with Viktor Orban's thinking when he opened the border under the condition that all the migrants will cross Hungary and will be accepted into other countries. Yeah. So I think that is an historical example for this idea. I think it's true. Yeah. Anything positive? Yeah, I think about it.
Just add.
Oh, sorry.
I'll also add a little bit about exception. At the very beginning of full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I know that in many countries, Ukrainian citizens were exceptionally accepted without passports, without IDs, and many were fleeing from the active warfare zone, so they didn't have documents. And that was something exceptional, that European Union accepted people without any IDs. For example, even Ireland, which was quite closed country before that, and we needed a visa to enter Ireland, separate visa, Ireland opened the doors. So for me, this is an example of exceptions, really. But it was like few first months of the full-scale invasion, and then it closed.
Can I say something about the exception? Maybe I'll switch the things and say that actually the suspension of Schengen, you can think of them as exceptions. And this is a good thing, in a sense that as long as they are exception, they reconfirm that the normalcy, you say? Yeah, the normalcy is having free movement and having open borders within the European Union. So that's a way of seeing the glass half full.
Thanks. I'd like to collect some more questions, and I should point out that we will have to end at 7:45 sharp because one of our panelists, Julia, has to leave then. But I know I saw Annika's hand.
The idea that factual research, empirical research, and good arguments would change anything about politics, I cannot really share that notion anymore. I have to say, and also I think there are already studies done on that a lot of misconceptions about migration lead to policies that claim to reduce the influx of migrants, but actually have the opposite effect, and still politicians argue for these policies where we know they will have the opposite effect of what is intended. I don't know if that makes sense. What I wanted to ask is, we are now so far we have been talking about the free movement of people, and this has been restricted in the last years. But how would you connect that to the free movement of goods, which like historically was a huge issue with customs and tariffs and so on, and because when you mentioned the COVID experience, this came to my mind, because the first thing that I in Germany in February, I think, of the COVID breakout. When in Germany everybody was still like, no, it's not here, and this is perhaps an Italian problem or somewhere else, was that I couldn't buy a washing machine because they were transported via Turkey, and in Turkey they already had COVID, and because they don't keep these things in stock. This cycle was like within days it was interrupted. So with this anecdotal personal experience, I would like to hear your thoughts on how you see the openness and the closeness of borders in regards to humans and non-human, like commodities or goods, depending on how you I guess your perspective on it would be.
Are there other questions? Yes.
Can I? Hi, thank you. I think you touched on my question just a little bit. I'm curious how you see the border as a classifying function and not just filtering of numbers, but if there's a sense in which the border works in classifying who is a desirable versus undesirable immigrant, in terms of race, in terms of, it can be maybe more clear-cut with nationality and the right papers, but like Julia's example of being a woman being subjected to a specific kind of treatment perhaps, which it does come down to human judgment of the border officials. Yeah. So how does the border behave differently for different groups of people?
I think we could take one more question if there are any. Otherwise, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. If there's time for one more question. I was wondering, I'm not an expert on border studies, but we're talking about mobility, we're talking about borders and what happens at borders. But I think the issue of migration, and I would say it's very important to distinguish between migration and migrants and refugees. The issues are not at the borders. The social issues appear sort of where people finally settle. And so community levels. Is that something that's reflected in border studies, or is that beyond?
Who would like to begin? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the historian. The last question, right? Terminology, migrants, refugees, we have to differentiate. It's very difficult, right? There's so many terms, and especially, I mean, there's also this dichotomy between economic migrant and political migrant that's often made up, right? But historically, and also I think today, there is a very blurred line between these categories, because people have agency and they want to go somewhere, forcibly or not, and they try to make it happen, right? They navigate the border regimes, they navigate the visa regimes. Of course, there's a qualitative difference if you leave a border zone. Yeah, that's a big difference here, and probably that's clear, refugee, right? But then it's not so clear historically. For example, the Jewish population from the Russian Empire, they were often called refugees. Yeah, I mean, scholarship has shown, yeah, there was pressure, yeah, but they made decisions out of their own agency for economic reasons, sometimes for religious freedom reasons, or just to connect with family, right? And so you make it work, and then you have to claim what's right for you, yeah? And you cannot blame the people, yeah, because they have their agency, and why don't they have a right to have a better life, yeah? And if being a political persecuted person will make it happen, then I'm a political persecuted person. So I think it's very difficult to have clear definitions, because mostly there is no clear category. I wanted to come to the question about the classifying function of borders. So there's this interesting book by Stefan Mau, I think it's Reinvention of the Border, the Sorting Machine, you know, yeah. And so he makes exactly this point. I mean, he's looking at it. I mean, I don't totally agree about his point about the reinvention or the invention, because we have seen it before. And these categories of race and economic, also health, as Michael mentioned, these are not new categories, but they are reused kind of, or come up as new or novel. Yeah, and yeah, the sorting machine, as Stefan Mau calls it, it's working since kind of a very long time. Yeah, Ettore is going to say something about it. Yeah. And then I can also move about free movement of goods later.
Yeah, I was really struck by what you said, Jan, about the cost of visas in the 1930s? No.
1890s.
1890s, because that resonates a lot with the study I carried out a few years back, in which I recorded the cost of all visas of the world, and found out that that's a fantastic sorting machine, in the sense that the borders are not only at the physical borders, the borders are also consulates. And when you need a visa, you have to go to the consulate. And when you have to go to the consulate, you have to apply for a visa. And the cost of visa vary wildly in the world, especially if you take into account the purchasing power of salaries in the world. So if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, on average, a visa application, not a visa, can cost like 70 days of work. So you have to work for 2 months to apply for a visa. And then they will not give you a visa. But even the fact of applying is exorbitant. Nobody can afford it. That's where the border really lies. Yeah, that's what and actually the mechanism was already operating, but the dissuasion of the visa cost was already operating in that's something I discovered through you.
Sorry, would you want to add anything about the cost in terms of time? Because I know you've also looked at visa appointment waiting times.
And there are also other street-level bureaucracy mechanisms that occur in consulates. It's putting people on hold. You want to have an appointment to get a visa, and they put you on hold, and they give you an appointment. Either they tell you there's no available appointment, or they say, okay, there's an appointment in 60 days. And maybe you mix the next conference. So if you're an academic, or you cannot go and visit your brother who's dying in another country. And we did a study on visa appointment time in German embassies and consulates worldwide. I can tell you about the methodology, but no, maybe it's too late. But basically for 6 months, we were applying or pretending we went on a website and looking at the closest possible appointment in German consulates in Dakar, Quito, Washington, all possible combinations. And we recorded meticulously the waiting time. And we found out again that there is that's a mechanism to keep people from the global south at bay.
I agree with you that the border starts in the embassy. Mm-hmm. Indeed, it's in the behavior of visa officers and even guards of the embassy, because I remember how I was applying. Of course, it's not comparable to what you said, as once I was applying for British visa, and it was like applying to the whole Buckingham Palace, there, because all these questions, whether I ever been in the Communist Party, and I was like, no, I'm too young to be in the Communist Party. Or something like that. That was something. And UK visa costs very expensive. It's like £100. It's something that I can't afford, for example. And they give visa only for 6 months. So the border starts there indeed, and the border is strengthened. But what I wanted to reflect on is local communities, the second question, I think, along the border. And I think the idea of phantom borders here is very relevant and very helpful to think. Because local communities who are living, for example, in my case, Polish-Ukrainian border, they all face with the artificial nature of the border that was drawn through, as I said, villages, households, parishes, and so on. So people living in this former Austro-Hungarian Galicia, they struggle with the artificiality of this condition. They all tell, regardless of their ethnicity or denomination, religious, Polish, Ukrainian, mixed families, that my grandparents were living in one country. It was our great-grandparents. It was Austro-Hungary. And we were in one region, and now I can't comprehend that some part of family houses is in Ukraine and something is in Poland, and we are all torn apart. We don't know from where we are anymore. This kind of conversations. So the phantom borders, in my mind, is very relevant concept here, the phantom Grenzen. Yes, and we can see the borders through that idea, through the view of local communities and the legacies of the former empires that are still here. And Annika, it brings me to your question about non-human agents crossing the border, because recently I discovered one more little pilgrimage in the borderland to the shrine that was demolished by communists and then restored by local community, local Ukrainian Greek Catholics. And again, this village was divided by Polish-Soviet border. It's in Lubelszczyzna, Lublin voivodeship. And people from this resettlement in third generation are coming back to that village. People from northern Poland who were resettled during Operation Vistula, people from Ukraine, and they were able to buy the family household and restore everything, the garden, the apiary. And when I was there, the current owner, third generation resettler, he told me, you see these bees, they have no borders, they don't know what border is. They are flying across the border. They go to Ukraine, they go back to Poland, and I don't know what kind of pollen they bring. Maybe it's Ukrainian pollen from Ukrainian flowers, maybe it's Polish pollen, but these bees are everywhere. They don't know border. And that, that touched me very deeply. I write about it, about the pilgrimage and the household, about the bees. And this is some kind of hope for me as well, And also Anna thinks the mushroom at the edge of the world, which we all read at our colloquium. It's also about crossing borders by non-human agents.
I just wanted to add to the sorting in the consulates, which is basically an invention of after the First World War, right? Before this was not happening, but after the First World War, the gates were really on the border. After the First World War, the gates go into the capitals, into the consulates. And there's also another aspect to it, sorting. It's the question of how far is the nearest consulate, right? You first have to get there. Yeah? I mean, for the US consulates, you have to go there in person. If your kids are over 14, they also have to be there. So you have to travel with your whole family, which in Europe usually is not a big deal, because everything is close. But if you are in a big country, I don't know, like Brazil, and you have to fly, you have to travel for days. So there's another aspect that can add, can double the price of the visa even. Yeah. Okay, sorry,
Actually, I have a little anecdote.
Sure.
For the visa project that I carried out, at some point we thought, well, we could gather the visa costs through these companies that ask the visa for you. So we found out that these companies are, one company, we web scraped the cost of a visa for these companies, and we found out that they actually doubled or tripled the prices on top of their fees. So they are scamming people. I wanted to warn the audience about it.
Be aware.
Be aware.
I wanted to add on a very positive note. I think borders are illogical. How would you say illogical? Unnatural. Yeah. Artificial. And I think as someone who's thinking positively, we are right now, at least in Europe, we are on that wave of closing the borders, but we'll go back to those times when we are opening the borders. Because borders are unnatural, artificial, I think borders will go away at some point. Trying to make a positive point here.
Okay, I think that's an excellent point on which to close.
We're all dead.
All right, so thank you all very much.